Hello, and welcome to Checking the Vitals, a podcast powered by SpecialtyCare. I'm Todd Schlosser, and today my guest is Mike Sheridan, the COO of Comparably. In this conversation, we discuss how healthcare recruiting has been impacted by COVID-19, why messaging is so important in the recruiting process, and how Comparably works with healthcare companies to present an authentic message that really resonates with potential employees. Enjoy the conversation. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. I'd like to start off with talking about Comparably in general and sort of what is your take, maybe Mike as the COO or, Comparably altogether, what is your take on the role that you guys play in helping healthcare organizations just generally be better at recruiting?
Yeah. So thanks, of course, Todd, for inviting me today and for everybody out there, obviously, an uncertain world and hoping you're safe, Todd,
Yeah.
and everybody else listening. Look, as one of the co-founders of Comparably, we really started Comparably with the idea of building a more fair and accurate way for companies to tell their story from the employees that are there today, Todd.
Yeah.
There are places out there and employee review sites, and that's really what we are, but they tend to be a bit of a free-for-all. Sometimes it's really lent itself to the angriest of voices, and oftentimes people that may never have worked there. Maybe they were a patient or a customer. Maybe they were a former employee. But we're really focused on, can we tell the story from the employees that are there today, the verified real voices, and bring that story to life for healthcare organizations and other companies out there in that storytelling process. And when you asked about where we fit in the recruiting angle, specifically for healthcare organizations, look, whether it's specialty care, whether we have a number of customers out there that are hospital organizations or even medical device companies, biotech companies that we help in that storytelling aspect of things, most of the time, the underlying focus and mission of the healthcare organization is patient care.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Right? Like everybody wants to make sure that it is leading with patient care because that is the most important thing. But when you do that, a lot of these different organizations then begin to really sound the same,
Yeah.
right? And so, how are we going to help you pull the stories out of your company using data, using anonymous employee testimonials, using a lot of different content pieces that we can automatically generate, help with, strategize with companies to continue to differentiate themselves in the market so that the mass shortage of nurses out there and
Yeah.
techs that one healthcare organizations are constantly trying to recruit, but also get folks in high school and college excited about that career path, right? Which
Yeah.
is critical in that process too. It's about telling these really unique stories of days in the life of techs and healthcare workers and hospital workers and hospitals themselves and really bring that to the forefront.
Yeah. So let me ask this, because you
Yeah.
mentioned sort of early on while you were talking that Comparably takes an approach that you're trying to do this in a fair and accurate way,
Yeah.
focusing on the employees that are there today. And rhyming aside, exactly how do you achieve that?
Yeah, so we actually work with organizations where they essentially are deploying a survey to the team members that are there today. And we have a number of different tools that really help them initiate the collection of this data and essentially then protect and ensure that the only people that can leave feedback on that organization's page are people that they have asked
Yeah.
specifically for the feedback or that has an organizational email address to ensure that they are the verified folks.
Right. Because you don't want people leaving reviews on like someone who, I don't know, like had a bad experience at like a Chick-fil-A. You don't want that person going on there and leaving a bad review for someone that has nothing to do with their employment status. Like they've never worked there. It's just about, I had a negative experience there or something like that.
And Todd, exactly, and that's really the point. And we have a customer that Uber and others in the ride sharing world,
Sure.
right? And one of the things is they had this huge organization of software developers, marketers, et cetera, leadership teams that really they were building there. But then they had this whole constituency that was drivers. And so on other employee review sites, the problem that became sometimes is I had a problem with this rider in my car,
Yeah.
and that was terrible, and it ends up on the Uber pages that exist out there on other employee review sites, and that becomes a real problem for them trying to decipher and tell the story of the people that we're recruiting today. But Todd, it's also really confusing to the job seeker,
Yeah,
right? Like,
absolutely.
what am I reading? How can I hear the experience from the people that are there today doing the job that I have? And that's the other piece when we play with data, right? And really focus on that data. If I'm a nurse, I want to know what the experience nurses are having.
Right.
If I'm a female nurse, I want to know the experience female nurses are having. Maybe the other piece of the organization doesn't necessarily apply. The HR department or the marketing department and
Sure.
what's going on with them. I want to know the experiences that are much more relative to me from people that have done it. And that's where we're continually trying to focus on.
So let me ask this because
Yeah.
we are recording this interview at the time of the what I'll call the COVID-19 lockdown, where we're sort of, and you can see I'm in my living room, you're in your room there.
Yes.
So how have strategies at Comparably changed during this time? Because recruiting has to be a completely different level than it used
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say for a lot of companies, right, Todd, it's shut down.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's two ways that I'd like to address this. One, what are we doing, right,
Sure.
for our company partners and folks that we can help in Comparably. Number two, trends we're seeing out there from a recruitment side of things and best practices that we, kind of working with our clients on. The first is this is not a time to be pushing various stories of company and hiring and necessarily you're employing. From our standpoint, we're just talking to people about what can we do to help you.
Sure.
There's a lot of companies that are managing layoffs. There's a lot of companies that
Yeah.
are managing communications. There's
Yeah.
a lot of companies that are cutting back on various HR expenses. So how can we help them do more with less right now and really, from our standpoint, be much more empathetic, Todd. That
Yeah.
that that is really a focus for us. What can we do to help? And Lindsay and I, are my team and the client success team are really on calls like that pretty consistently, trying to help our customers. On the other side, the strategy side of things right now, outside of the pullback in recruiting, the pullback in hiring, this is a great time to really be strategizing and preparing yourself for the other side, whenever that is,
Right.
right? This is a time to dig in and understand, hey, what are we really standpoint? Because this is a moment, as you said, Todd, where we are all in this lockdown. And the way that we treat our employees today and the way that we treat our customers, this is going to be remembered,
Yeah.
right? This is going to be remembered. And I can assure you, and we've seen it again and again out there in the world, and certainly at hospitals where there's a lot of, I'd say, healthcare workers that feel like they don't have the resources they need to do their job. And that's both an issue at the federal level and lots of different failure points across the
Sure.
way
Yeah.
there, right? But those stories come out and are going to affect the hospital systems where that person worked. And so the other side of this is going to be, how am I treating people during that crisis? You're going to get the question of, how did you treat your people
Yeah.
during that crisis, right? Did they feel supported? And that's really the strategy that we're talking to folks. Make sure your team members today have the empathetic approach from you as the employer. Do you have what you need to be successful in your job?
Yeah.
Do you have what you need to be safe? Do you have what you need to be productive? How is your personal mental health right now?
Yeah.
And those things need to be monitored and kept track with your own team And that's kind of that first strategy, Todd.
Yeah.
I think that second strategy now is, hey, let's take the step back and what do we want to make sure we stand for going forward? Let's make sure that the talent funnel that we had, we may not be hiring today, but let's also not go dark on those folks. Let's communicate to them, even if it's in a mass way, so that that talent pool continues to track what you're doing, hear you as a voice. It might be a thought leadership article. It might be something about your individual healthcare organization. It might be something about keeping safe during this time, or a number of other things. But any part of that communication is really important to keep that talent pool going, which is part of the ongoing strategy for you. And then the third thing is, as I said before, and kind of relates all the way through, your brand is what your brand is. And you've got to make sure how you act is reflected in the words. And if you're not acting, I think in a way that you would be proud of, that's going to be your first focus. And if you are acting in a way that's even exceeding your expectations and you're seeing your team thrive, make sure you got that story to tell on the other side,
Right.
because that's what's going to help differentiate a lot of companies out there.
I absolutely agree with that. And especially when you say make sure you've got that story to tell, it's really going to be great if your employees have that story to tell about
Yes.
how great they were treated during this time, whether they're healthcare or whatever industry that they're in. I know I have a
It's
lot of friends that work in the sort of entertainment industry because we're in Nashville, and a
Mhm.
lot of them are furloughed, but some of their companies are still covering their medical benefits or things like
Yeah.
that. So there are things you can do, even if you have to furlough employees, you can still create something that meets or exceeds their expectations, so that they'll have a positive experience with sort of what's going on right now. And let me say this because it sort of leads into my next question. Because you mentioned branding and how important branding is. Why do you think branding is so important, sort of for a healthcare company?
Yeah, so thanks again for that. I think it goes back to, as I said before, one of the key things that is difficult, right, is a healthcare organization. Typically, they all have a very similar mission and set of values. Oftentimes, my thought there is the brand aspect of things has to go beyond that, because otherwise it just seems too similar across various healthcare organizations. So you've got to differentiate
Yes,
on that brand side of things.
absolutely.
And there's all sorts of different ways to do that, right? You can be um, really differentiate from your service offerings. Of course, you can differentiate on your innovation and your R&D aspect of things. You can differentiate on your service levels, of course. But one of the key pieces there is, and this is certainly reflected when you're patient forward, oftentimes in the healthcare organization, how you treat your employees and then how your employees are treating your customers and your patients. And
Absolutely.
that's just such a critical piece, I think, to really continue to pull out the organizations that do this really well, and again, make that part of your brand.
And a part of that differentiation strategy has to be sort of the right messaging that's resonating with people. So, what kind of
Mm.
messages do you find that are resonating with people today as far as recruiting goes?
I would kind of do this in twofold pieces, Todd.
Okay.
It's both a messages and really a channel, right? And what we continue to see, and it always depends on who you're targeting from a recruitment standpoint, and of
Right.
course where they exist. The people that I'm trying to recruit from a physician standpoint may be quite different than where I'm trying to target my nurses
Sure.
and whatnot. And so when we think about the resonating of things, it always comes back to authenticity, right? There, there are brands and stories out there that really oftentimes overly reflect positivity, right? And Comparably isn't here to make a company look better than it is.
Right.
Uh, the focus is you've got to tell the real story, because otherwise it is seemed by the recipient of those messages that this just can't be real. That has to be more marketing than a true employee experience.
Right.
You want your folks to share the good and the not so good, because that's what's really going to continue to resonate with folks out there. And when they get in, by their way, their expectations are set much more fairly than, oh my God, everything is great here. We get paid the best, and the work-life balance is the best. And oh my God, leadership is so transparent and always communicative. Like, I wish every organization was like that. And we're always trying to improve to get towards that. But oftentimes that's just not reality.
Sure.
And so the worst thing is here's the shine that I put on our organization, right? And you come in, and then none of those actually, or a good piece of it, don't actually get reflected to you in the experience that you have. So the message is that authenticity. I think you also have to think about it from really micro targeting on who you're speaking to. And this is exactly what I was talking earlier about, how we're trying to help companies leverage more data. When you're talking to a female nurse, or a female tech, or a female physician, or a female candidate anyway, it's important to kind of tell them the experience that other people like them are having, or a minority, or whatever it might be, a marketing person. What are the folks in marketing having? And that's really going to speak and lay it out to them a lot more clearly, and something that they can grab onto and I think really identify with.
Sure. So let me ask this. So
Yeah.
if you can get that granular with the feedback from your employees, is it still anonymous?
Yeah.
So how do you achieve that balance?
We tend, and this is the great thing about our system,
Sure.
right? There's a company, a very large public company, that recently started working with us. They had spent about 7 years building up a profile on one of the fairly large employee review sites out there.
Sure.
They had about 300 people, both former and current employees, leave feedback over the course of that 7-8 years.
Okay.
In a matter of 6 hours, they had double the amount of feedback on Comparably than they had in spending and investing and building up and asking their employees. And of course, having those angry voices go and leave feedback on
Right.
that other employee review site. And so when you talk about that aggregated data, right? So we get this feedback, and we ask optional questions like, hey, which department do you work in? Hey, what's your gender? Hey, what's your ethnicity? Hey, all of these various pieces, so that we can understand and use this data in a really aggregated, anonymous fashion to help the company tell that story.
Sure.
It protects it so that, there isn't one female employee in marketing and, oh, here's what the female employees in marketing say about their experience at company X, Y, and Z. That's not how it works. We've got to have enough data from female marketers to make sure to protect them.
Sure.
In that data process, so it continues to stay anonymous.
So, and I don't want you to give me any proprietary
Sure.
information that is sort of, an in-house secret, if you will, but how on earth did you achieve double the results that another type of site did? And what you said, it was 3 or was it 7 years?
It took 7 years, yeah,
Okay,
versus 6 hours.
So how did you do that in 6 hours?
Yeah.
I have to know.
Yeah, it's no proprietary secret, Todd.
Okay.
We've really come up with a simple way to collect data from employees. We've also integrated with tools where employees are working. So we've done integrations with Slack. We've done integrations on mobile phone.
Awesome.
We've done
Okay.
integrations in all these various places to make it super easy for an employee to take 2.5 minutes on average to go through and leave this feedback. They're not thinking up written content to write. They're not writing some angry letter. This is 35 questions or so. How would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 10? How would you think about this, true or false? And how overall, do you feel about your company? Multiple choice questions like that really get to the heart of the matter.
So they're sort of like, for lack of a better term, like NPS type questions.
Yeah,
where it's
very much so.
out of 10. And because you can answer 35 of those questions very quickly, like you said, in 2.5 minutes.
Actually, 2.5 minutes.
And we say all the time in marketing that you got to meet your audience where they are, whether that's in our case, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat or all of these other places where, they might find themselves. So it's great that you guys have found a way to integrate these questions into Slack, which is something that we use a lot, or other programs like that, because that's where they are. And honestly, that's where most of the work, especially when people are on
Especially
lockdown.
now, right?
Yeah, that's where a
Yeah.
lot of the work is getting done. I know me and my team, we have a lot of Zoom calls. We have about one every day, but
Hmm.
everything else is, any communication we have to do where we would normally pop into each other's offices, it's all on Slack,
Yeah,
so
I would
that's
just
great.
yell across the office, Todd,
So
is what I
we do that
did.
too. It's great. I love open floor plans because
Uh,
especially in any sort of environment where you have to be creative. I think that that's the easiest way to do that because you have sort of, I like to call it groupthink there.
yes,
And
yes.
now that we're talking about sort of the isolated nature that COVID has put us into, how do you think as we come out of that recruitment strategies may change a little bit because we have gone through this?
I think there's two things that are going to happen
Yeah.
that are at the forefront. And my CEO and executive team talk about this all the time. We've been talking about it with a lot of other company executives. Part of the key in recruitment going forward, our guess is, like a lot of companies, and I think we were a little bit more conservative here. People were hiring in advance of the actual growth of the business. When everything's good, right? It seems like, oh, so what? I can just keep hiring and growing and hiring and growing and
Right.
hiring and growing. And the way I'm going to grow is by hiring.
Yep.
I think on the other side, Todd, it's going to be a little bit more frugal that way. I think folks are going to say, before we make that next hire, are we bursting at the seams? If we're bursting at the
Right.
seams, hey, let's go make that hire. Even if we're bursting at the seams, maybe we need to wait 30 days to see how bad we're bursting at the seams,
Sure.
um, before we make that hire. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a more conservative nature overall in the hiring paths of a lot of companies. I think the second piece is, I think one of the main questions that is going to come up, whether it's in interviews with hiring managers or within the HR themselves, is how did the company treat you during this time?
Yeah.
How did the company teach you? Yeah.
I think that's going to be very, very important. And it sort of leads me to my next question because, and you may say that for this next answer as well, but a lot of companies are on hiring freezes or they've had to
Mm.
furlough or lay off workers. In the healthcare industry, there are companies who are hiring during this time because there's immense
Yes.
need. So, how do you promote yourself the right way as a recruiting organization while sort of being cognizant of the time that we're in?
I think my thought there is, when you've got a need and you're growing like you are in many healthcare organizations right now and the market demand is there, I think folks need to understand what they're getting themselves into, right? These may be people that had not thought about the healthcare industry before. They're hearing some of the stories that are going on the front lines of hospitals in ER and ICUs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there's oftentimes, again, coming back to that authenticity
Yeah.
of, hey, here's what's really going on. I think the other path, though, is really the healthcare world in general is really getting a spotlight right now of the resources and the planning and really the balance that they need to have as far as those resources going forward, to make sure employees are protected, patient care is going to be there. And so I think it's going to be a future here in both innovation in the healthcare world, as well as larger organizations here that can take impact in of some of these. Not that I expect a pandemic every year,
Right.
but some of these outlier pieces that may become more frequent for us. And that's an exciting opportunity for folks. It's certainly lucrative. It's certainly a growth oriented. It's certainly very much a team environment type world right now for people on the front lines. And if there's anything
Yeah.
coalescing organizations, it's the about, not just being quarantined on lockdown. What are we going to do to stay safe? What are we going to keep doing to move forward? And organizations promoting that to folks that may be out of work today, and how they're going to help support that, and how they're going to keep giving opportunities for potential candidates right now. I think that will really help them stand out.
So, and let me ask this, if you're recruiting during this time or as this time ends and people start to ramp up in their businesses again and start to hire again, what benefits, obviously salary is always important, but what benefits do you find that attracts prospective employees, I guess, more?
I think I would have answered that question even differently a month and a half
Oh,
ago,
wow. Okay.
right? A month and a half ago, I would have told you, well, everybody wants the gym membership. Everybody wants the work life balance, and so the 4-day work week, or everybody wants that work from home day. And those really had become very, very important, certainly to the millennial generation and,
Sure.
and below, as they saw this. Hey, it's not just work, work, work for me. I want something else more than that. I do think one piece that will carry over is you will have corporate social responsibility, and different programs about how they support it and gave back to the community and how an employee can get involved there. I think that will be a benefit that folks really can lead with and that will resonate with candidates. I think, how are you helping me work from home? I don't think work from home is going to be a nice option anymore. I think there's going to be this, hey, there's going to be some time when we're all going to have to work from home. And it may be, periods that are longer than we want. What are you doing with equipment to support me there so I
Right.
have that? And I generally think the things like fringe benefits, like gym memberships and things like that, I think those are going to become less impactful. I think it's much more about team events. It's going to be much more, how are you getting together as a team? How did you support the community? How are you making and helping the employees stay safe and be productive? And I think those types of benefits, at least for the next 6-12 months as we come out of that, are really going to be at the forefront.
Absolutely. So it's more about, it sounds like, or gonna be about sort of building community, whether that's virtually or in person when you can, instead of sort of the fringe like gym memberships. I mean, if you could find a gym that's open now,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
right.
So, but
Right.
you're right. If you have a way to connect with your team, you're not feeling so isolated and siloed. So that does help.
Todd, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah,
It is about community and how are you bringing us together and how are we doing it here with the company, but then how are we also bringing this outside and
absolutely.
supporting our community and others.
Absolutely. So I'd like to sort of tee you up for a question because we've been talking a lot about healthcare recruiting specifically,
Mm.
but that's not necessarily all you guys do. So I wanted to ask you this question: how does a Comparably differ from like an AMN, which is like a nursing recruiting organization, or even from like a specialty care where we recruit sort of perfusionists and neurophysiologists and all of that stuff? How do you guys differ? Because your business approach is very different.
Yeah, we're an employee review site
Right.
really meant to help employees pull out that story, right? So the things that we doing is we have a public page that become really part of the job search mechanism for candidates out there, which is one of the key things. The secondary piece is we're giving all of these assets to recruiting organizations and even staffing organization to help tell that story to the candidate in their funnel.
Hmm.
We're helping these companies really improve their websites so that they have assets to tell the employee stories where these job seekers are actually looking on their job posts, on their careers pages, and again, putting that front and center so that we can really, again, be top of mind for folks there. And then, Todd, the other big thing that we're typically known for is we do our awards on a quarterly basis where, based on employee feedback over the last 12 months, we're able to celebrate pieces of the culture that make that company great. And on top of it, and again, this is part of the fun of our business, is we get to tell stories of companies that may not be known out there
Yeah.
in national press like Forbes and Fortune and Inc. and Wall Street Journal and Business Insider and USA Today, to get this mass audience of passive job seekers, active job seekers, knowing about companies that are doing things the right way and hearing that directly from employees. So all of the recruitment, marketing support, and pieces that we do there is fantastic and extremely valuable. The press amplification piece in getting the name out about companies that a lot of folks may not know about is one of the most important things that we do for organizations.
So let me ask this. If I was, let's say, the head of recruiting for a company, what are some of the cool sort of features or benefits that Comparably offers that may be different from some of other people in this
Yeah.
space?
Yeah, I think the first one, as we talked about, companies spend so much time on asking employees to leave feedback and all. We make that super simple
Yeah, it
for
sounds like it.
companies.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we talked about earlier, we make it easy for people to leave feedback and ensure that all of these HR leaders aren't spending their time walking around asking
Yeah.
employees for feedback constantly. So we take that out of their hands and make it simple. The second piece is oftentimes we're an additional strategic help when it comes to organizations in their recruitment marketing and employer branding side of things. So we'll actually lend our strategic voice. We build content for companies, sometimes custom content, whether that's videos, whether that's articles, to really pull the stories out from their employees and get that into marketing, get that into the hands of the companies really simply and easily. And so that's one of the key content creation pieces that we do really well. Clearly, the amplification in our best of lists on a quarterly basis, whether that's, best companies is rated by female employees or best CEOs or best companies for professional development, all these different awards get highlighted in national press, which is a very unique thing and not a lot of companies get to do because we have that data approach. It really differentiates us and makes that exciting for the media outlets that we have, and of course, job seekers and viewership. I think the last piece is we have this massive library automatically created for the HR teams and the marketing teams to use to tell these employee stories. So we create posts that you can instantly click and post to LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram to get these stories out there simply and easily and customized to your brand, your colors, your font, whatever it is. Simplify that storytelling piece, because one of the things, and Todd, you probably know this in marketing, perfecting the story is important. There's a frequency of that storytelling that has to be done.
Yeah.
And most of the time, what we see is companies create great content and they try and perfect it. It's just not frequent enough, it's just not consistent enough. And so we make that part of the process really simple to keep amplifying on the social media channel of your choice, the story of your choice, to really get that out there in a much more consistent way. And then, the last thing, as I told you earlier, is all of the additional things that we can bring onto the website, your website, to really help job seekers that are hitting there. Sometimes even customers, the experiences that your employees are having make it really, really easy and beautiful to enhance that website and the experience of those folks.
Awesome. So, with this focus on branding that we were talking about, what do you think some of the bigger developments in, a brand or a brand story for a company? What do you think some of those developments will be over the next, 36 months?
I think one of the things that we've thought about for a long time, and we've seen this again and again at companies, is the overall company brand is usually led and appropriately so in marketing. And then this employer brand, these stories of your employees and what you're doing to recruit and find talent pools lives in HR. Sometimes marketing's helping them. Oftentimes the employer brand doesn't get a lot of love there. And HR really has to work on unlimited budgets, and the recruitment team have limited budgets and resources to do that. Part of why exactly we created Comparably to really have those assets ready for
Yeah.
the HR team. But one of the developments that I think is going on, and we're seeing this a bit more and more, is the actual employer brand is converging on the brand itself. And we're hearing about customers that are looking about how companies are treating their employees in some larger companies. And even a few public companies where we're working with the executive team. We've heard how investors have seen how they're treating their employees, and it really helps them, feel much more comfortable about their investment in the company. So I think what's going to happen, and this has been ongoing for a little bit, but probably going to converge a bit more quickly here, is those two pieces are going to have to come together, and marketing and HR are going to have to work much more closely, because the things going on in HR and the employee experiences are going to affect the brand, and marketing's got to be cognizant of the changes and the impact that they can have and should have and need to bring to that HR team that really has owned that and historically, and become a much more collaborative piece. HR isn't a cost center. It is, but it shouldn't be viewed as a cost center.
Sure.
The human capital piece of things is one of the most strategic pieces of an organization. And so companies need to be treating it that way. And I think it's going to keep getting more and more attention that way, and more resources because of it.
So I just want to thank you for taking the time today to talk to us here. And I really appreciate you sort of giving us your insights from all that you do at Comparably.
Todd, it was awesome to be here, and thanks so much for the conversation. My hope is as we move forward, everybody stays safe. I hope you stay safe.
You too.
And hopefully we'll get back to some level of normalcy here all together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Todd.